All right, guys. So Sam Sedar of the Majority Report recently made an appearance over on one of these 20v1 Jubilee videos with a bunch of young conservatives, and it did not go well for the conservative side of this equation. So much so that, as pointed out here by Matt Binder, you had a bunch of online right-wing commentators or pundits or accounts who were so distraught by the performance of the conservatives in this video that they thought that they were the leftists, right? Because there's no way conservatives could come out looking this stupid. So just a couple of examples of that, and then we'll get to the clips here. Cat Turd said, liberals are so dumb, in response to a clip of a conservative having a brain malfunction in regards to how government agencies are funded and whether or not they're taxed. So him misinterpreting who the conservative, who the liberal is there. We also had another account here who said, that look you get when you know you have to debate a brainless, witless, social justice warrior clown whose IQ is in the mid-50s, posting a picture of Sam, who again is not the conservative in this back and forth. And then when this was pointed out to this account, they said, really, he sounded like the adult in the room, LOL. So now we get to the clip that they were both referencing there, in which this person, I guess, performed so badly that they thought he must be a leftist, right? Because we would never be this stupid.
I'm talking about Trump's rescission of these orders on these agencies.
If you received a tax cut as an employer, wouldn't you hire a person of color?
Dude,
if you could pay them less?
Listen, we're talking about government agencies that do not get tax cuts. They don't. Government agencies.
They don't.
No,
yes, they do. They absolutely do.
I'm talking about
every private and public sector gets tax cuts when you hire a person of color.
Government agencies don't pay taxes. Government agencies operate are funded by the government.
That is not true. That is not true. And you know,
so he disputes two things, both that federal government agencies are funded by the federal government, and then he also disputes that they don't pay taxes, which again wouldn't really make sense for these government agencies to be paying taxes given that they are federal government agencies funded by the government. Why would they be back paying taxes to the government that's funding? What are we doing here, guys? What are we doing here? Part of this, I think, is on Jubilee for maybe like the casting decisions or the way that they're setting up these videos. But at the same time, everybody who's in these clips, they decided to come on this show. They knew that this video was potentially going to, get over 1 million views and be seen by lots of people. And they decided to do it and to come on and to be confidently very wrong about just baseline facts on these things. And that brings me to my other point, which is just like, I don't know how much value you can get out of these kinds of, debate format videos when you can't even agree on basic shit like that. Like, that's not even the difficult part of what this debate is supposed to be about. I mean, you can see the prompt up here. The actual prompt of this specific part of the conversation is supposed to be Trump's attacks on DEI hides his real goal, which is to give corporations more power, right? Like, that's an interesting conversation to be having. It's a point I've made before that, the conversation from conservatives about DEI and wokeness and trans stuff, it's just like jingling keys in front of a baby to distract you from the fact that we have an unelected billionaire, the wealthiest man in history, who's running around ripping up government agencies to ensure that he faces no accountability. The Republicans in the House are planning a massive multi-trillion-dollar deficit exploding tax cut for wealthy corporations and billionaires. They're slashing social programs for the poor and protections for average working class people. Like, that point that Sam is making is 100% true, but they can't even get to that part of the conversation because this guy, for some fucking reason, is disputing that government agencies pay taxes. And not only that, but they're also getting tax cuts for hiring minorities. What are we doing here, guys? Now, we move on. Second clip here, where it somehow gets exponentially worse, because here we have somebody who is openly and proudly defending xenophobic nationalism in her own words. Let's go ahead and watch this clip.
What's the problem with xenophobic nationalism? Don't you think that's better for Americans in general?
To be xenophobic nationalism is better?
We should have a coherent culture. Everyone should be a part of the same culture. We should have assimilation.
Which, do you get to choose what the culture is?
We already have a dominant culture.
What is the dominant culture?
Based on European and Christian values and identity. That is the dominant culture.
White Christian,
it's rooted in European identity.
White. So your argument is that
has been the dominant culture.
Just to be clear.
And we're not letting people assimilate to that. We're saying you should keep your culture, and this is why our culture is so divided.
Your argument is that Trump is good for those who want a dominant white European culture.
I mean, that is what America is. It's rooted in European identity and Christian values. That's what it has been. Would you really disagree with that? What is it then, if that's not the identity of America?
Well, I think the identity of
For the
America...
majority of time, America's been a country. You don't think that's been the identity?
Well, actually, no. I think actually the identity of America has been, for better or for worse, a melting pot in that regard.
Yeah, maybe since like the 1960s. Even then, even we had this idea of a melting pot literally means assimilation too. It means melting. It means you're assimilating to the dominant culture. Is that not what melting means?
No, it doesn't
and
mean
now
you're
instead we're saying there's something wrong with
the dominant
xenophobia.
Culture. No. I mean, look, I got to be honest with you. You and I have a fundamental disagreement. We will never see eye to eye on this. It's a choice. And I think what you're expressing, though, is really what the Trump movement at its heart is about. And I think that's problematic.
I disagree. I don't think Trump's anywhere close to being a Christian nationalist. That's ridiculous. Trump's basically a Democrat from 15 years ago when it comes to social issues.
So you don't think that he's conservative enough for you?
Oh, definitely. Nowhere close. No.
He's not xenophobic enough for you?
No, he's trying to import a bunch of H-1Bs. Are you kidding?
Right. Oh, so you want to get them out too? Yeah. No, I think you're making my argument for me.
So, oh my God. Okay. First off, I at first, when I first saw this clip, I was like, maybe she doesn't know what the definition of xenophobia is, because it's one thing to say I'm a nationalist, right? Or I care about the interests of Americans over anything else, right? Or maybe I want a more restrictive immigration policy. I would disagree with that, but that's one thing to say. It's another thing to say xenophobic nationalism, right? It's like saying I'm a white supremacist. It's like you're making a very explicit claim there. Xenophobia is essentially you want to discriminate. You want to have prejudice proudly against foreigners. What are we talking about here? And then her other point is, she makes an interesting point, right? She sets the cutoff point in the 1960s. And she says, before that, we had this, amazing white European dominant culture, right? And apparently that was ruined by the 1960s. I'll leave you guys to research or to ask yourselves what happened in the 1960s in terms of, civil rights in this country. But she's referring to the pre-1960s America as if that's the better era of this country, when we're talking about segregation, and before that, slavery, and outright legal discrimination against minorities. But she's referring to that as though those were the good times, I guess. At least that's how I'm interpreting what she's saying, in combination with her openly calling herself a xenophobic nationalist. So absolutely wild clip there. We somehow move on from that, I guess. Here's a follow-up on more of the DEI back and forth, which I think was a large part of this whole video.
And there are people of color that Democrats pretend don't exist, like J.D. Vance's wife, and
J.D. Vance's wife is not in the cabinet.
No, but if J.D. Vance was a Democrat, his wife would be lauded all over everything because of her color of her skin.
I'm not here to defend the Democrats' choice on every policy, but there is one party in this country that is identitarian. There is one party that is represented and it is homogenous, and it is the Republican Party. 85% of Republicans are white. That's just the reality of it.
So does that
Some
mean
people
that,
don't necessarily have a problem with that.
But here's the thing. You said even if let's just say, okay, that's true. 80% of Republicans are white. Does that mean that they're less moral? That they can't run an effective government? What does race have to do? What does race have to do? Hold on. What does
Donald Trump didn't have to say my vice president is going to be a white male.
No.
Because they all knew it was going to be.
No, this is the premise of DEI. What does race have to do with running an effective government? What does race have to do? If let's say DEI on the micro level.
I will tell you right now.
DEI on the micro level at McDonald's.
I'll tell you.
Am I going to get better nuggets?
I'll ask you a question.
If the cashier is black or white, what does that have to do with anything?
I'll tell you what it is. First of all, DEIA means that if you come into this agency or corporation, you're not going to be discriminated against because you don't look like everybody else, or you don't have the same physical abilities as everybody else, or you may require handles on the bathroom or whatever it is. That's what DEIA does. But does it make a government better if there's a broad representation of the people it's supposed to govern? Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Regardless of DEI, don't we already have things in our Constitution that protects people's rights, protects people?
No.
We don't?
No.
Do we or do we not?
No, we do not. Tell me. Tell me what protects people from discrimination in housing and in work and hiring or getting loans. It's all statutes. It's all statutes. And in these government agencies, there was nothing except for that order. That's why Trump just rescinded it.
I'm gonna tap out.
So literally just kind of gives up there at the end. Now, I mean, I think Sam's argument is pretty simple in this context, especially when the main conversation they're having is about Trump getting rid of some of the protections for federal government agencies when it comes to DEI. And that's how he's framing it, which I think is accurate, is that, you know, at some level, you need to have protections for people based on, you know, skin color or their gender identity or their sexuality or disabilities that they may have, which is the A that, you know, he was describing there in accessibility as part of DEIA. So I think like that's an entirely reasonable way to frame it, especially given the history of this country where, you know, white people have been given a leg up in everything that he was just listing out there throughout the vast majority of our country. So, you know, to some extent, I think that the DEI conversation, again, is a massive red herring. It's largely a distraction. I absolutely agree that you need to have anti-discrimination policies in place to protect people from discrimination. But the idea from conservatives that like there is some massive like quota machine that's going on and white people are being discriminated against and blocked from opportunities, it's just clownish. It's just clownish. And again, the focus on DEI and on wokeness and on trans stuff, it's just a side conversation for what Republicans are doing in the background, right? It is, again, the jingling of keys in front of a baby to distract you from what their actual economic and geopolitical agenda is. So, I mean, you know, good for Sam for, I guess, forcing somebody to literally tap out in one of these clips. Now, we move on here to the topic of Social Security. So let's go ahead and watch this clip.
Retirement rather than relying on other people to fund it for them.
You're talking like a 401k. The 401k started during that Reagan era. It has been a disaster because the fact of the matter, for better or for worse, people just don't save in the way that you're talking about.
Why?
It would be nice if
the government were changing the mindset and actually pushing that cultural shift towards, we're not just going to hand you money when you're 65. You have to plan for it right now.
We've had a 40-year experiment with that, the government affecting the cultural mindset, and it failed.
We've had a 40-year experiment of everybody. You know what my parents say? Do you know what grandparents say? They go, well, I'm just waiting for my social security check to come in, rather than I have $800,000 waiting for me because I thought about it when I was 19 and 20 because I didn't have this grab bag of money waiting for me. You're assuming that young people.
I try and tell my kids.
So we agree. We should get rid of Social Security and phase it out. Well, so we should phase out. How would you listen to this idea? You phase out Social Security to where people who have 5 years left before they retire get 100% of the benefits, and then people like me who have 40 years until we retire, I'm not going to get it. I'm going to get screwed either way.
No,
you really think I'm going to get Social Security someday?
I guarantee you, at the very least, you're going to get 78% of your benefits.
That's awesome. I'll get $9,000 a year. That's great.
In calling for our government to increase the cap, in fact, get rid of the cap, then your grandkids will get Social Security.
I would much rather, and again, maybe we'll just disagree, but I would much rather result to, hey, 20-year-olds, please save for your own retirement, invest for your own retirement, because the government is bad at dealing with money.
And what happens
don't rely
if they
on
don't?
them. What happens if what?
What happens if those 20-year-olds don't listen to you?
The same thing that happens if a 20-year-old just doesn't go and get a job because I tell them to.
No.
They're going to have a problem, but that's not my fault.
No, I got news for you. It's not your fault, but there used to be in New York City 30,000 people sleeping on the Bowery.
No one in this room was alive before Social Security. We've all lived under this, just like the
and it
income
has
tax.
been the most successful government program in the history of our government.
Things that are successful don't just start to die out and end up in the.
It's not dying out.
It's the grab bag of money, the massive excess that was there in the early years because of the 42-to-1 benefit.
It wasn't a massive excess in 1930.
42-to-1 is a massive excess.
There weren't that many people who had entered into the Social Security program.
And the fact that
in 1970 it was 3.5 workers to 1. Now it's 2.5, but productivity has increased it. I've told you why the Social Security Trust Fund is running out. It is because of wealth disparity. Billionaires hiding and hoarding their money above the cutoff line, which is 176,000. That's the cap. If you remove the cap, your grandkids
billionaires aren't keeping $2 billion under their mattress. They're investing it back into.
They're just putting it into some stock market, or they're just looking around.
And what do you think a
crypto,
401k or an IRA relies upon? It relies on the stock market and things like that.
Yeah, a 401k relies on the stock market, and I knew people who were retiring in 2008 when the stock market tanked, and they got screwed.
All right, so that was pretty heated back and forth on that one. You know, I guess I get the point that this guy is trying to make. For himself as an individual, if you want to approach structuring society purely from an individualistic point of view and you say, listen, I'm saving up money right now. I might be fine. I'm just going to keep putting it away in the stock market. It'll grow over time. And then I'm not going to need to rely on Social Security. That's great if you can make that happen. And obviously I'm trying to do that as well. I'm trying to put away money so that I have a little bit extra when hopefully I get to retirement age. That's fine in terms of like giving young people advice for what's in their best interest. But it's not fine when we're talking about, again, structuring an entire society. There's a reason why we needed to have Social Security created in the first place, and it's because old people were falling into poverty at a mass scale. Okay, just to give you a perspective on just how successful, because as Sam was pointing out there, it's the most popular and it's the most successful government program probably in American history. Now, for perspective on that, here from the CBPB, Social Security lifts more people above the poverty line than any other program. Here are the numbers on that. Effective Social Security on poverty, official poverty measure from 2023. So adults age 65 and older, excluding Social Security, would be 37% in poverty. Including Social Security, that gets cut down to 10.1%. So you're talking about like, you know, a 27% drop off, a quarter drop off of elderly people over the age of 65 who would otherwise be in poverty if it wasn't for Social Security. Now, this also financially doesn't just impact those old people who might end up out on the streets or not being able to afford elder care that they need, but it also affects younger generations down the line because you, as a younger person, are going to have to spend more out of your own pocket in order to care for your parents or for your grandparents as a part of that. So the notion that, like, as a society, we can just rely on individual people making very sound and solid financial decisions throughout the course of their life, and that everybody is going to have the opportunity to even be able to save enough money in the first place. I mean, keep in mind, he's talking about the stock market there. It's like 90% of the stock market is owned by the top 10%, right? This is a playground for the wealthy that we're talking about here. For a vast majority of average working class Americans, it's difficult to be able to even get to the next month, to keep a roof over your head, to keep food on the table, to send your kids to school. It's difficult to meet just like basic bare necessities for average working class people right now. So the idea that as a society, everybody's going to be able to put enough money away that it's going to be okay in the long run, it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. If we did what this guy's suggesting, you would have tens of millions of elderly people thrown into poverty. Okay, now, final point on Social Security. The most ridiculous thing about what he's saying is the core point of what Sam was trying to argue there, which is that Social Security is not going bankrupt. It's not going to be, solvent within the immediate future. The only thing that you have to do, and this is Bernie Sanders' plan that I've talked about loads of times before, the only thing that you have to do to make sure that it's solvent, to make sure that it's funded, to make sure that it's steady for the next 75 years, and that you can even increase benefits is to lift the cap. Right? There's a cap at about $176,000, after which if you make more than that on every dollar above that, you don't have to pay into Social Security. So in other words, somebody who's making $150,000 a year is paying about the same amount into Social Security as Elon Musk, who's worth $400 billion, right? That's not right. So get rid of the cap. It's entirely funded. It's not going to go bankrupt, and you can expand the benefits. Okay, so it's a very simple solution. Okay, you don't need to dissolve it. You don't need to spiral millions and millions of elderly people into poverty and send them out onto the streets. It's not a difficult thing. Now, a couple final clips here, and then we'll finish off the video. Here we have Sam, once again, I think this is another one on the DEI one, pointing out that they don't really seem to be able to back up their broad claims about wokeness and DEI with actual evidence or examples.
Conservatives don't have an issue with trying to spread job applications to poorer communities.
Well, so then why rescind DEIA requirements in government agencies?
Because the problem with DEIA is there may not be perceived actual number quotas, but that's what it devolves into, and especially with corporations.
Do you have the evidence of that?
I mean, sure, we can look at corporations that are government agencies that are hiring people on not true, proper bases. We can even look at. We can even look at.
Do you have any evidence that that's happening?
Yeah, even the DNC's nomination of Kamala as president this year, there was no reason to nominate Kamala as she wasn't democratically selected. She didn't go through a single primary. None of these things.
So you're saying that Kamala was the vice president of the United States after the president drops out 2 months before the convention. You think that's a DEI?
She wasn't
hire?
Every presidential nominee is democratically selected to be the nominee for that party,
Do you realize
except
there were
for
not
Kamala
even
Harris.
Primaries prior to 1972
well,
in
sure,
the Democratic
but this
Party?
This isn't before 1972.
Well, I understand, but what did you think you were going to run primaries in those 2 months?
Well, sure,
I mean, Joe Biden should have dropped out
even
3 years ago,
before,
as far as I'm concerned.
Well, sure, but even before, when Kamala was running in primaries, she wasn't the next man up. None of this. She wasn't the next person.
Well, she was the vice president,
right? Of course, but she wasn't in primaries.
Detail. But listen, aside from, I would have might have wanted a different candidate as well. But that has nothing to do with Trump rescinding orders that basically say you need to search for a wide range of candidates, not necessarily give any different benefits, but you need to make sure different communities have access to the awareness of this job. You need in your office accessibility for people who have physical handicaps.
Sure.
If you have folks who identify as as trans, you need to make it at least hospitable and not. This is all non-discriminatory stuff. That's what this is all about.
But you're cherry picking the portions of DEI that even conservatives don't have issues. Conservatives don't have issues with making workplaces.
The whole DEI apparatus within our government was a function of doing exactly what I said. Had nothing to do with quotas.
It is unfortunate that those things get taken out, and there might not have been specific
what
numerical
else was he
quotas.
trying to take out?
It's trying to take out people getting jobs that don't deserve those jobs. People getting pushed into positions they have no qualification.
There is no evidence.
Okay, so a couple of things on that. First off, conservatives did it to themselves when they started using DEI and wokeness to define basically everything. That's why I think they're struggling to actually define it in practical terms. Now, Sam is having a very limited conversation here about the orders that Trump rescinded and about how DEIA actually functions within government, which is largely as a non-discriminatory protection, right? For people who may happen to be trans or they happen to be disabled or whatever the case may be. That's what Sam is having a conversation about. But again, because conservatives, I mean, think about all of the different times we have heard this conversation about DEI and wokeness. They were calling the mayor of Baltimore a DEI hire. Okay, the duly elected mayor of Baltimore, because he happened to be black after the Baltimore Bridge collapse happened when a ship crashed in to one of the pillars randomly, right? They're calling him a DEI hire. So it's hard to come away with any other conclusion than when you guys talk about this, you really just are kind of like, at least some of them, right? Not all, but some of them are kind of just looking at minorities in high positions and saying, because you are a minority, and because of my misunderstanding of what DEI is, I'm just going to assume that you're unqualified. That's kind of largely what's going on here. And again, he's asking for specific examples. Can you point to specific examples where, I don't know, at the EPA or the FAA or any of these government agencies that people are being hired who are not qualified for the job specifically because they're black or whatever, right? And they can't come up with that. So what does he divert to? He diverts to Kamala Harris, which is like a whole different conversation than the conversation about Trump rescinding these orders on DEI within federal government agencies. Like, that's a whole separate conversation. And I actually disagree a little bit with Sam on that, because I do think that Democrats should have at least tried to have a much more democratic selection process, and that Kamala Harris was not, by any metric, the strongest candidate that they could have possibly put up to go against Trump and JD Vance. So I kind of disagree with him on that. And this guy was also earlier making the point that Kamala was like a DEI hire. Biden also kind of screwed himself on that front because, number one, Kamala didn't do well in the Democratic primary, so it's not like she was a fantastically strong candidate in the first place. And also Biden said, I'm going to pick a black female candidate. Now, again, there are tons of black female candidates who he could have picked for vice president that would have been enormously qualified. You can make that case for Kamala if you want, right, with her background in politics or whatever. But, again, he put himself in a difficult position on that one specifically. But the broader conversation is it kind of just can't progress because, again, we're not having a conversation about what's actually happening in reality. We're having broader conversations about like generalities of DEI that don't even really seem to exist in the real world, or at least they can't provide any evidence that this is actually happening. Now, one final clip here. where Sam tees up this guy on the claim that Trump's policies benefit the wealthy more than average working class people. And they get into a conversation about climate change and oil.
Trump's policies make the rich richer and the working class poorer.
Trump is going to do great things with oil and let us drill, and what that actually does for the economy.
Like I say, we are producing more oil in this country than any country in the history of the world.
What executive order did Biden just sign to have to do with offshore drilling in the East Coast?
He stopped it.
Yeah. Really dumb idea. We're about to begin a new.
Well, so you want to go beyond even the record-breaking thing?
Yes, I want to become energy independent.
Climate,
and that lowers inflation.
We're going to sell this oil.
Better.
We don't use the oil. We sell it. We sell
getting
it.
money in the pockets of American citizens.
We sell it. Well, how is that oil getting to the pocket of American citizens?
Because when you lower the prices of oil, that lowers the prices of all
products.
No,
I understand that the inflationary prices effect of energy, but the fact of the matter is, they're just going to sell it.
Yeah, we're going to
sell it.
Yeah, so we're going to.
You want to produce even more oil than we are now.
Yes.
And you don't think climate change is going to impact. No. You don't believe in climate change.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion, but no.
Well, I mean, it's sort of the same discussion.
Yeah, no, I believe that climate change is, well, there's obviously an element of climate change that is partially true, but lowering or
Which part of it?
Raising the man-made raising temperatures by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius in the next 150 years isn't necessarily a detriment to society.
Okay, wow. So, yeah, I mean, there you go, guys. We need to drastically ramp up oil, even though, as Sam was pointing out, we're already producing more oil than any country on the face of the planet in the history of the world. Climate change is partially true. Which part of it's true, we don't really know. He says that 1 to 2 degrees warming, which is an undercount based on what the current estimates are, isn't going to be a detriment to society. So we can continue heating up the planet and nothing to worry about, I guess, in the future for this guy. I guess the core part of my follow-up on what Sam was asking there is, like, how do you think that money is going to be returned to the pockets of average working class Americans? Because it's the fossil fuel corporations, right, as well as like global oil cartels that are setting the price of oil. Okay, if the U.S. produces more, that doesn't necessarily mean that gas prices are going to plummet here in the United States. This was a huge conversation we were having about like a tax on these fossil fuel companies for making record profits at the expense of what Americans were paying at the pump. Guess who was putting that forward? It was progressives like Bernie Sanders, who wanted to confront the price gouging oil companies, and it was Republicans who said that was evil socialism or whatever, right? So this money is not going to be like if we had nationalized oil, then you could kind of make that argument. And if we're selling it overseas and then that money is given out in a dividend to the American people, then maybe you could make that case. But that's just not how capitalism functions here in the U.S., right? And again, that gets to the broader point of, I guess, what I'll leave you guys off with. For my conservative brethren out there, at this point, either you're not paying attention, or you're deeply in an echo chamber, or you're deeply misunderstood about what's going on right now. Trump could not give less of a single solitary shit about what's in the best interest of average working class Americans. Okay, that's not his agenda. He's a billionaire, or at least he claims to be. He surrounds himself with billionaires, with donors, with lobbyists, with special interests. This guy is the most corrupt American president in possibly our entire history. And that's saying a lot, because most American presidents are absurdly corrupt and also are in the pocket of big corporate interests and of the billionaire class. Trump has ratcheted that up to an entirely different scale. So if you can honestly take a look at Trump's agenda and think that this is in service of average people like you and me, like I don't know what to tell you at this point. So credit to Sam for, I guess, throwing himself in the lion's den there, although I don't really know what the opponents he was going up against, if you could even call them lions, like, I don't know, like the Chihuahua den, I guess, that he was going into. But I'll leave you guys off with that. I mean, do you guys even think that these kinds of videos are productive or valuable in any way? Or is this all just sort of a spectacle that I guess we could call, entertaining at the very least?
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying